Good Thursday morning. It is a rainy day. It'll be a rainy week or so here in Sacramento. There's even flood warnings out. So, but compared to the rest of the country, don't let me be a downer for you. Anyway, look what I've got here. This book, I believe, back in 1970 something, early 70s. This is a tandem edition published in Malta and the UK, or Malta, UK. Yes, 1976 edition of what is called Aleister Crowley, The Complete Astrological Writings, edited by John Simons, who is the author of The Great Beast, which until then was probably one of the only biographies that anyone ever read of Aleister Crowley, and it pretty much stinks. Okay, and Kenneth Grant, and I'm sure Kenneth Grant provided a good scholarly contribution to this little book. It is hardly the complete astrological writings, but it is several essays that Crowley wrote, a treatise on astrology, and another essay with a huge single word title, Bet Tra Kof Reno Bu Cosmo Machia. But anyway, this is about the only thing that you could get. It was long rumored that Crowley had quite a bit of astrological material, but at the time, this is what passed for the complete astrological writings. But it included comments on the outer planets that Neptune, Pluto, Uranus, and so it was very interesting. Why am I bringing this up? Because that's not the only thing I'm going to talk about this morning. Briefly, we're coming up on the new year, and this is when even the most non-occult people like to figure out what their yearly horoscope is going to be. And so the newspapers and magazines, have your year for Aries, Taurus. And so there's a lot of astrological interest, even among people who aren't normally esoterically inclined. But for those of us who are esoterically inclined, it gives us the opportunity to at least speculate on what's transiting for us in the coming year, and what wonderful things we can expect in the world around us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Crowley's astrological thing. And I posted actually a picture, not to get you to buy it because it's very expensive now, and it's not in paperback yet, not that I know of. The general principles of astrology. Now, this is what this was trying to make you think it was. And this is relatively new, but I'll get into that in a second. Along about 1981, one of our lodge members was an active sort of officer in her local Mensa chapter. Now, I'm not in Mensa, okay, and I don't suppose I could ever pass myself off as a Mensa kind of person, but a lot of our lodge members were, and one in particular was an officer in her local chapter, and they were having she wanted me to talk about Aleister Crowley, and at a Mensa meeting, and I don't have, because I'm not in Mensa, I didn't have the good sense not to wiggle out of that invitation. But anyway, I found my notes. For my speech, and I'm going to share it with you. And I posted another picture that I'll on Facebook today that I'll explain in a moment, of a picture taken by my good friend and brilliant author Colin Campbell. He was the photographer. He's not in the picture. He's taking the picture of Nathan Alexander and Richard Kaczynski and myself sitting out in front of a beautiful little cottage on a lake in New Hampshire, which was owned by Evangeline Adams. And it's a place that Crowley stayed when he wrote, see, what was it that he did write? He wrote something. He might have been writing this, okay? Whatever it was a very important magical retreat in Crowley's life. But I'll get to that in a minute. Here is what I said before the most intimidating audience of Mensa nerds. I say that in a loving way. Did you know that before the United States entered World War I in 1917, England had been fighting and losing to the Germans since 1914? And did you know that public sentiment in the United States was very strong for us to enter the war on Germany's side, and that the U.S. government was thinking seriously about doing just that? And did you know that the primary reason public opinion changed and we became crazy to go to war with Germany was because a German propaganda newspaper in New York City began printing outrageous editorials praising the sinking of the luxury liner Lusitania by German U-boats and advocating unrestricted submarine warfare against all the world's civilian shipping. Editorials that announced that Kaiser Wilhelm was the new Parsifal, Jesus Christ incarnate. Editorials that screamed to the world that it was Germany's God-guided destiny to rule the world and enslave all nations. And did you know that these editorials were quoted by outraged U.S. senators and congressmen who used them as evidence, or referred to them as evidence, that America must go to war to save the world from the insane and bloodthirsty Hun? The rest, as they say, is history. The U.S. did, of course, enter the war on England's side, and we were the deciding factor in Germany's defeat. But did you know that those wild editorials, those editorials that caused the United States to rise up and go to war, those outrageous and insanely provocative newspaper or editorials did not even remotely reflect the German foreign policy or sentiment at the time? And did you know that when the real German Foreign Office, who for 3 years had been walking on eggshells trying to convince the American government that this conflict was a European matter and that Germany was a reasonable country, they read these editorials when the German Foreign Office, the real one, read the editorials, their jaws hit the floor. They slapped their foreheads and said, "Mein Gott!" Remember, I'm doing this in front of a bunch of... "Mein Gott! Who das Dummkopf been writing these nutso articles? We gonna lose a war." Did you know the person who wrote those nutso articles was not a German patriot? He was an English spy, an insanely brilliant secret agent provocateur, who, perhaps more than any single individual on earth, was responsible for compelling a reluctant United States to amass one of the greatest armies in history to come to the rescue of his beloved England and change the geopolitical destiny of the planet. That's magic. And speaking of magic, did you know that just a few years later, when England was again in trouble with the Germans, that this same secret agent, at the request of his friend and naval intelligence officer, Ian Fleming, yeah, that one, the creator of James Bond, that same secret agent provided Winston Churchill with invaluable insights into the superstitions and magical mindset of Adolf Hitler and the leaders of the Third Reich. And I might add, especially, okay, there's no question that Crowley consulted on the astrological superstitions of the Third Reich. But there is also, if the story can be believed, he advised that Churchill exploit the Nazis' magical paranoia by being photographed as much as possible, giving the two-fingered V for victory gesture, because that's the sign of Apophis and Typhon. Okay. The sign of Apophis and Typhon. Now, Apophis murders Osiris. And, of course, there's the morning of Isis, which is a kind of a swastika symbol. But the destructive thing was that Apophis and Typhon. And the Nazis' swastika is a solar symbol of the sun. So, using the Egyptian formula of Isis, Apophis, Osiris, the sun is destroyed by Apophis, and so that was the logic there. This sign of Apophis and Typhon, the Egyptian god of a powerful symbol of destruction that, according to magical tradition, is capable of defeating the perverted solar energies represented by the swastika. Churchill obviously did that, and there's every reason to believe that Crowley had advised him to do that. That's magic. Now, shifting gears here for a minute, and now we're going to get into what I was talking about at the beginning. Did you know that before 1927, astrology was not a household word in the Western world? That there were no popular books on the subject, no newspaper daily horoscopes. Hardly anyone knew their sun sign or knew that Leos were pushy or that Scorpios were sometimes too hot to handle. Nobody ever used the pickup line, "Hey baby, what's your sign?" There were no astrological calendars or birthday cards. No zodiac keychains, coffee mugs, or condoms. All this changed in 1927 when a woman named Evangeline Adams, who actually died 90 years ago last month, when a woman named Evangeline Adams published her classic text, Astrology, Your Place in the Sun. Then, in 1930, Astrology, Your Place Among the Stars. If you're a serious astrologer or an astrology student, you probably have both of these classics in your library. Adams was arrested for fortune-telling. That sounds ridiculous, okay? Remember, that was 1927, okay? And she was arrested because fortune-telling was illegal. But even in the 1970s, my brother learned astrology from Burton Morris in Newport Beach, who ran a class and a little shop called the Sun Sign in Newport Beach on Balboa Peninsula. He was arrested for fortune-telling. And he fought it. And he won. But I digress, okay. Adams was arrested for fortune-telling, and the trial was the Martha Stewart case of the day. This, how old this speech is here. The judge eventually dismissed the case when Adams, armed only with the birth information of the judge's son, predicted with uncanny accuracy the details surrounding the boy's life. Almost overnight, Evangeline Adams became an astrology superstar, predicting the stock market crash of 1929 and guiding the decisions of industrial moguls, politicians, and celebrities. Evangeline Adams brought astrology into the modern age, and with it came interest in the acceptance of other non-Christian spiritual sciences and disciplines. We could even say that Evangeline Adams changed the world. That Evangeline Adams was a pivotal figure in the history of world spiritual movements. We could say that, but it wouldn't be exactly true. It wouldn't be exactly true because Evangeline Adams didn't write Astrology, Your Place in the Sun, or Astrology, Your Place Among the Stars. She hired a ghost writer to write these classic books. A master astrologer who for over 70 years would receive absolutely no recognition for his efforts. a man whose unsung contribution to the world of astrology was so great that in 1999, the estate of Evangeline Adams graciously admitted that this man did indeed write the bulk of her works, and went so far as to help republish them in his name in the new enlarged edition. And that's what this is. And it is indeed a magnum opus. And it sort of chases this one. Woo, I gotta run away. His name was Aleister Crowley. And as I'm sure you've guessed, he's also the secret agent who wrote those nutso poopin' editorials. A man who spent his life changing the world with magic. During his lifetime, the tabloid newspapers called him a traitor, black magician, cannibal, the wickedest man in the world, the man we want to hang. He didn't help much with his reputation. He used wild drugs and called himself the B666 and made readers of his 1923 book, Magic and Theory in Practice, think that he personally sacrificed 120 baby boys in 1 year. I think it was 150, actually. He was a militantly out-of-the-closet bisexual dynamo in an age when people didn't even talk about the closet. Did I say bisexual? He was omnisexual, would be a better word for him. He'd tackle a tree if he thought there was a magical reason to do so, and he'd keep good notes. If nothing else, he was a very interesting fellow. And then I opened the discussion up for questions and answers. But anyway, I thought I would share that little tidbit with you this morning, because many of us will be turning to our astrological projected horoscopes here just as we approach the new year. So, well, anyway, that's where I'm going to stop today. Constance and I went out in the break in the rain, but it's supposed to rain nearly 2 weeks straight here, and there's been all sorts of warnings and floods and things like that. So the weather is going to be very crazy. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the great saint, modern saint, Shakma Windrum, who died relatively recently. She was sort of a shamanistic holy woman, and I met her first at Between the Worlds conference in, I forget where it was, Delaware or someplace. She said she wanted to talk to me, and so we made some time we could talk alone. And she told me some very interesting things about what she'd seen for me. And, this is the first time I've ever met her. I was very surprised. And she sort of went into a a reverie, a little trance of some kind, and said how concerned she was about the weather. And at the time, this is so many years ago, that global warming and the climate crisis wasn't on the front burner for anyone. And I was thinking, well, I wonder if the U.S. government is doing some weather experiments with HARP or something up in the polar region. I didn't know what she was talking about. And I still don't know what it might have to do with me, or whether I was just sort of a catalyst, like a certain vacuum tube in her psychic thing, and that just kicked off. But the weather is on the forefront of all of our minds, and it is of great concern to me, and it should be for all of us. So anyway, make the best of it, and don't lose yourself in the blizzard. Until tomorrow, continue to be good to yourself. Be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will.